Alrighty here. I am going to share my slides and we'll get started. All right, has that loaded for everybody? John, Molly, you good?
Yep, I see it. Yep.
All right, cool. Okay, well, this is a topic that I am extremely excited to dive into. I'm a huge advocate of this type of technology. I know Dr. Lemansky is as well. I know Dr. Molly is as well. She's been way ahead of the curve on this stuff since 2014, working with patients using CGM. So she's just got an incredibly vast amount of experience to share. And both Dr. Molly and I are incredibly excited about this starting to become mainstream and how this can help people in all types of different use cases, from managing a chronic condition to just simple things like managing weight control and other lifestyle factors that are related to blood glucose. So we've got a lot of great content here to cover. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to do some basic introductions here first. Then we're going to go into our feature presentation with Dr. Molly. And then we'll have a live demo. And in the live demo, I'm going to share the screen in Heads Up. And I'm going to show you how you can integrate continuous glucose monitors and use them for remote health monitoring. And that could be remote health monitoring for a patient, or it could be remote health monitoring for someone who is doing health optimization. But whenever you're working with CGM, there's always other data that you're going to want to pull together to complete the story. And that's really where the Heads Up platform comes in. It can pull in the CGM data and then supplement it with all of the other biomarkers you would need to tell the whole story. Excuse me. So we'll have time for a live demo, and then we'll take questions. And then if this is something you think you want to use in your practice, we'll have some information to set up a call where we can dive deep into how to use this for your own business. So my name is Dave Korsunski. I'm just the crazy guy with an idea who started Heads Up, and the rest is history, as they say. But we're building a platform for remote health monitoring that integrates different types of sophisticated wearables like the ones we're about to present here today, lab result data, and then the other types of tools you'd need for basic patient engagement to really pull together the story for remote health optimization. John, you want to do a quick intro here?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dave. I'm John Lemansky. I'm the Chief Medical Officer with Heads Up. I'm an internal medicine doctor, and I run a concierge preventative health wellness practice in Puerto Rico. And I've been with Heads Up for 3 years now or so. And my focus is really on how to make this platform clinically relevant to practitioners. So this topic today, I think, is going to be amazing. I'm really excited to talk with Dr. Maloof, who, as Dave mentioned, has been on the forefront for a long period of time. So looking forward to it.
Thank you, Dak. Molly, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm a physician. I have a concierge practice dedicated to optimizing the health of investors, executives, and entrepreneurs. I teach a course at Stanford on health span extension. I'm writing a book based on my course with Harper Wave, and I am an entrepreneur. I am in the process of selling a supplement company and starting a biotech company. So I do a lot of things, but I spent about, since 2014, I've been obsessed with CGM, and I've worked for some CGM companies, and I advise a company called Levels Health. So yeah, I guess I'm considered someone who is an expert in the space. I find it to be one of the most important and useful tools in my practice for clients, and I'm super excited to share what I've learned with you guys today.
Thank you, Dr. Molly. And we test every device under the sun here at Heads Up, as you can imagine. And this is also one of the most important devices that I use personally, and that we have integrated and connected to the system. So lots of good stuff here today. We'll just level set here for everybody. These are basics. Hopefully, if you're on this webinar, you have some cursory experience with a continuous glucose monitor. Hopefully, you've used one before. If not, it's awesome, and it's incredibly insightful. But just to set some context here, there's a couple on the market. I wear the Dexcom here every single day, and typically that's been used for insulin-dependent use cases, but also starting to become more common in mainstream. it does truly continuous monitoring. So every 5 minutes, without any action on behalf of the individual, it's transmitting a data point to the phone, and then from there it can get shuttled off to wherever you want. Just some differences in hardware. They're 10-day sensors and requires a 90-day transmitter, slightly different than the Libre, which is a longer sensor time, no transmitter. And the Libre really seems to be proliferating more broadly in the health and wellness applications. But in general, I'm extremely excited about how this technology has started to become mainstream. And I'm the only person here that's not a medical professional, but the implications around metabolic health, since I've been working on Heads Up for the last 6 years, the number one use case for people coming to our system has been to help them with a metabolic condition. Even when we were just a direct-to-consumer app, now that we have a B2B platform, when we were just a direct-to-consumer app, it was people with metabolic health issues that were trying to figure out how to improve their health using dietary and lifestyle interventions. So it's just been the number one focus for us for the last 6 years. And this technology just completely takes the game to the next level. So that's why I'm so passionate about this. Molly, I'd love to hear from you just over the last, well, I guess it's 7 years now. If you could just comment on how things were back in those early days and really where you see things are now in terms of mainstream adoption.
Sure. So when I first started working with CGM, I was using the Abbott Libre Pro, which is a thing that you buy directly from Abbott. So I would buy boxes of Pros and these little receivers. It was before it even synced to the phone. And you'd have to have this, you have to carry around this little extra receiver in your pocket and scan it every time you wanted to see your blood sugar. There were a lot of advantages to the Pro. You could download your data, you could get these spreadsheets, you could analyze it. And then the Abbott that syncs to the phone came along. But for some reason, a lot of these pharmacies are still carrying these like old school versions that have these receivers. And so when you're prescribing them at a pharmacy, you really want to say to the pharmacist, like, I want the Abbott Freestyle Libre 14-day sensor that syncs to the iPhone to the LibreView app. You don't want the one with the receiver. And oftentimes, like if you don't get it right, what will happen is the pharmacy will prescribe you the sensor, and then the patient will actually need the receiver, and it's just a hassle. So it's kind of important to get the hang of the prescription capacity. There's also companies like Levels, which you can order from, but these consumer companies they're charging hundreds of dollars more than they actually cost. These are very, very cheap if you get them from Costco. They can be as low as $30 for 2 weeks. But typically they're more around $60 to $70 for a sensor, but still it really depends on a person's insurance. Some people's insurance covers it completely and some people's insurance doesn't cover it at all. I also highly recommend checking the GoodRx coupons for these because that can make a big difference in cost.
Awesome. And where would you say we're at now? Just in terms of the general awareness here.
I know that consumers are starting to figure this out, but there's still, like Levels Health has 100,000 people on their waiting list. So that's still not that many people who even know about it, but there's certainly a critical mass happening. At the same time, there's about 10 companies that are in the consumer space across the world that are trying to create different software for CGM. There's also an implantable company now that has a 3-month CGM. I haven't tried it yet, although I'd love to have one in my arm. And right now, it does seem like right now the insurance companies and the mainstream system is certainly against a lot of healthy people wearing CGMs. At the same time, my experience is that most people actually aren't metabolically healthy. And it turns out that most people actually have subclinical insulin resistance without even knowing. I've had people who have, perfectly good looking CGMs, CGM curves, and then they have like an insulin level of 12. So there's more to it than CGM. You do need to get some labs done, preferably a fasting insulin, C-peptide if you want, fasting glucose. You're not going to get the whole, hemoglobin A1C we're going to talk about. It's not a perfect test at all. It's actually a terrible test. So I think CGM offers a lot more information, but it's not the complete amount of data that you need for full understanding of metabolic health, but it's important. So I can talk about more of it and when I get to my slides.
Well, that's a great nugget you just dropped there, Molly, where you may have even what appear to be normal curves on the CGM, but your fasting insulin is still out of whack. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. And John, high level, you've been using these quite some time yourself personally and in practice. So high level thoughts.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of what Dr. Molly said. I've been using it pretty much since they've been on the market. I would say that it depends on what the goal is of the practitioner. Big picture kind of policy, public health, hemoglobin A1C, I think, is a decent test to like screen people. But again, when you start getting into kind of the more higher functioning people who are more aware of their health, that test can be normal for 10 years while your insulin is going through the roof. So I think Dr. Molly is going to talk a lot about kind of metabolic stuff with and the benefit of CGM. I think most people on this call are probably interested in not being behind the curve in terms of managing healthcare. So they want to make sure that they're on top of it. So like the fasting insulin is okay. It's not the best test because it can be very inaccurate depending on how you take it. I think the CGM is a good way of inferring data, meaning that you can learn a lot about somebody and the triggers that are affecting them metabolically by looking at CGM data versus just like a finger stick. So in terms of like long-term solutions for the United States and the world, I think it's one of the most important things that we can use. I'm not as maybe confident that insurance companies will pay for it for people who are healthy. Not so much because of the cost, because costs have come down significantly. I think they're concerned about people making medical decisions without having a practitioner with them. So I think if you can balance a practitioner using CGM with a patient population, then that's kind of where you're going to have the sweet spot where we can make headways in terms of improving people's health.
Well, I know when I go back home to Canada, I can buy them over the counter.
Yeah.
So hopefully
bootlegging them.
Yeah, hopefully that trickles down here as well, because that would just remove a major obstacle for a lot of people that want to be self-informed and want to do this. Anyhow,
I mean, you can get a CGM. I mean, there's a lot of ways to get them, but I'm just thinking kind of globally what our goals are as practitioners and just individuals. That's kind of what I see.
Great. Thank you, Doc. Thank you, Dr. Molly. So we're going to dive in here to the feature presentation. Molly, these are your slides. So I'm going to let you just crush through them. And John and I will probably badger you with questions as we go through. So let's tee it up here. And if you want, I can just give me like a little cue, next slide, and I'll manage it for
I'll just
now.
go like that or something.
Any direction is
Swipe
fine.
left, swipe right.
Swipe left. All right. So physiologic resiliency. Okay. So when we're young, we have this ability to handle stress. We have this ability to handle hangovers. We can eat whatever we want and our blood sugar stays stable. As we get older, we start stressing our system out and we start losing this physiologic resiliency, and we start having our blood pressure go up and our blood sugar go up, and now our joints ache, and now we can't drink as much as we used to because our livers don't function as well as they do. So there's going to be some things that are going to show up as I do this. So you're going to have to. So when you're young, you have like 4 to 10 times the functional capacity to require, that's necessary to require for life. But as you get older, this functional capacity declines. This should be another one. And basically with declining organ reserve, we're less able to bounce back. And there's going to be a few of these things that show up. We didn't really practice this prior. So basically the goal is, as we get older, next slide. There's going to be a few others. So basically the goal is when we are aging, what we want to do is we want to prevent this decline in physiologic resiliency. And really the biggest causes of decline in physiologic resiliency are nutritional excess, inactivity, and chronic stress. And we're going to talk about why. But type 2 diabetes basically is, from a mechanistic perspective, is when these adaptive processes fail and we start to see our blood sugar rise. So one of the big goals I have for my clients is building metabolic flexibility, is building in hormetic stressors into their life so that their bodies can basically endure these small stressors and increase their ability to adapt to the demands. So cyclical ketosis, carb cycling, high intensity interval training, weightlifting, mastering the stress response, all of these are facets of building resiliency into the body. Next slide.
That's awesome. So you're actually inducing these stressors deliberately to prepare the body and to build up the adaptive response deliberately. And all of those ones, I presume that you mentioned are healthy stressors that the body is engineered to withstand, as opposed to eating something that sends your blood sugar to 220.
Exactly. We don't want those kind of stressors. We don't want to have like metabolic stressors that cause us damage.
Yep.
You can just press through all of these because there are going to be about 4 of them. But the point is that when we're in medicine, we focus on end organ systems failure. We focus on the person has hypertension, we give them blood pressure medicines. The person has diabetes, we give them metformin. But we're not really asking what led to this problem in the first place, right? So way upstream is chronic stress, is eating the wrong foods at the wrong times and the wrong amounts, and is moving your body too little. Exercise is the signal for the body to make more mitochondria and to make healthier mitochondria. Stress causes mitochondrial allostatic load, which is essentially the pressure on the system and the energetic systems that can contribute to them breaking down over time. Eating the wrong foods, the wrong amounts, and the wrong times all contributes to insulin resistance, which also contributes to mitochondrial dysfunction. If you're a mitochondriac like me, you believe that a lot of these primary hallmarks of aging are actually secondary to mitochondrial dysfunction, and all of these chronic diseases of aging are actually downstream from that. This is a different way of seeing health than most doctors are taught or even think about. But I believe that this is the most likely to be. I mean, this to me has the best sort of rational explanation behind why so many people are getting these chronic diseases. So this is Martine Picard's work, and I highly recommend reading it. So basically, this loss of physiologic flexibility from energy overload, inactivity, and high stress contributes to ectopic fat stores in our liver and our muscles, which contributes to liver insulin resistance and muscle insulin resistance, and persistent low-grade inflammation, as well as high waist circumference. All of these things, there'll be another thing showing up soon. But basically, go back. Sorry. So basically, liver insulin resistance, we see typically high fasting glucose, right? Because your liver's job is to maintain healthy fasting glucose. When we have skeletal muscle insulin resistance, we see high postprandial glucose. So when you have a sink, basically that's already filled with glycogen, and you're overfilling it with even more blood sugar, and there's no room for it to go into, and the cells are insulin resistant, you're going to see blood sugar rise when it should be stored after meals, should be used after meals, preferably. So high fasting blood sugar, high postprandial glucose leads to oxidative stress, which damages blood vessels, which contributes to things like hypertension and heart disease. Degraded metabolic flexibility from insulin resistance also contributes to high triglycerides, low HDL. Essentially, all of this contributes to what's called metabolic syndrome or syndrome X. Next, please.
Which is presumably why once people get their blood sugar under control, all the lipid panel numbers start getting better, and
they start to improve.
Yeah, the cholesterol numbers improve,
Yeah.
the HDL goes up, the triglycerides go down, just from basically a reduction in glycemic load.
Right. Typically, what will happen when people start training people in blood sugar metabolism and CGM is almost everybody can get the triglycerides down and can get the HDL up, but the lipid, the LDL particles, when people are consistently in ketosis or consistently low carb, one of the biggest problems that I didn't really talk about in this talk is patients can get physiologically insulin resistant to, basically physiologically insulin insensitive to carbohydrates from just being consistently in a low carb state.
Makes sense.
So I recommend carb cycling and metabolically building metabolic flexibility through changing your macronutrient ratios rather than consistent ketosis, which is where a lot of people go when they first start using CGM. It's important that we do lower blood sugar because high blood fasting glucose, high postprandial glucose does contribute to damaging the beta cells, which contributes to blood sugar rising and the pancreas starting to fail over time. Next slide. So, this is essentially what we want to prevent, right? We want to prevent the beta cells from becoming more and more dysfunctional, and we want to keep them because this mitochondrial stress does directly damage the beta cells, and if unchecked, contributes to prediabetes and diabetes. And then essentially diabetes is beta cell failure, right? Like you basically lost 50% of your functional capacity of your pancreas and start seeing your blood sugar really rise quite high. By then, you're a little bit late to the game. Yep. It is possible to reverse diabetes, but it's way easier if you catch it when someone's insulin resistant versus pre-diabetic or diabetic.
Completely
Next slide.
agree. Yeah.
So the thing you got to know is that I'm going to talk a lot about nutrition today and stress and alcohol, processed foods, sugar, and movement. But there's a lot of other things that can affect your blood sugar. So, for example, I went from Israel to Lebanon and discovered that with just the air quality change, my blood sugar went up 10 points. So literally going from like the country to a city and having significant pollution will increase oxidative stress in the body, can raise blood sugar.
Wow.
Testosterone, for example, and growth hormone. If someone is being prescribed these two things, that can increase blood sugar. Estrogen deficiency, menopause can actually affect blood sugar metabolism. Medications, allergies, allergic reactions, substances, age, body composition, all these things can affect blood sugar. So it's not just about what we eat. It also has a lot to do with other things. And I shouldn't also forget that sensor error is not uncommon. If you go into a sauna with a CGM on, you're going to see a spike. And even if you exercise intensely, sometimes you will see a spike. So it's not always a bad thing, but you got to just know the things that are going to change the curve.
Yeah, I've seen that anytime I do
Mhm.
sauna, it goes
There
up.
you go. Yeah.
Anytime
And that's
sun
mostly, I think,
exposure.
a sensor error.
Yeah.
Okay,
And I guess
cool.
this is why it's also highly individualized and why it's also so important to start being able to see when people's glucose is elevated
Well,
throughout
yeah.
the day. Is it
So
a
I've
fasting
had
issue, a
clients
postprandial issue, an air quality
or a
issue?
sleep apnea issue.
Yeah.
You know, sleep apnea is totally a huge cause of insulin resistance and can contribute to insulin, insulin dysregulation on its own. So it's not just about our lifestyle. A lot of it has to do with other conditions that we have.
And sleep deprivation too, I presume.
Yep, we'll get into that for sure. All right, so there's a bunch of different ways to monitor blood sugar, but the key here, and we're not going to go over all these, but the key here is that like the hemoglobin A1C has a false negative rate for prediabetes of 64.9% and 75.1% for diabetes, and a
Wow.
false positive rate for 20% for prediabetes and 0.6 for diabetes. So it's not a great test, and I just don't trust it. So I don't take it that seriously. I test it on everybody, but I don't look at it as something that is completely reliable. There's a bunch of different factors that can make it really unreliable. Finger stick blood glucose, nobody really wants to do. Fasting glucose only gives you your fasting numbers. And frankly, I see a lot of people with abnormal fasting glucose just because they woke up stressed and had coffee before they got their blood labs. Oral glucose tolerance test is a really uncomfortable test to take. Nobody wants to do it. So very few people will go and drink that sugar. So you can actually just do like a sort of a home version of a glucose tolerance test, which we'll talk about in one of the slides. But this is why I like CGM so much, because of all the problems with these other tests.
Yeah, I know you've got some references to Wired to Eat and some of the tests that they do in there as well.
Yes,
So I think we're
exactly.
going to cover that later.
And this is just, we'll go through this quickly, but basically like one of the nice things about CGM is it can give you, once you learn how to read the curve, it can give you very specific tactics on how to strategize how to get your blood sugar in the right range. So once you learn the different specific things you can tell a patient to do, it can make it a lot more engaging for them to actually use the CGM. Next slide. So what is normal glucose, right? Like I'm gonna go to the next slide. It's a better slide. So I look at CGM ranges from 3 different ways. The big one is the fasting glucose and the post-meal glucose. You can also look at standard deviation, average daily glucose, but generally speaking, you really want to look at these 2 markers first, which is, the best fasting glucose is less than 85 milligrams per deciliter. Better is less than 90, good is less than 100, prediabetes is greater than 100, increased cancer risk goes up at 110, and diabetes diagnosis at 126 or above. For post-meal glucose, basically, I think most healthy is less than 110.
Yep.
Most doctors will tell you less than 140. According to the American Academy of Clinical Endocrinologists, it's less than 120. Damage to large blood vessels begins at greater than 135. Damage to large blood vessels begins at greater than 160. And renal, basically spilling glucose into your urine, it begins at 160 or above. So, to me, post-meal glucose, you really want to start teaching people that the standards that we have in mainstream medicine are far too high. And this is one of the biggest things that you want to focus on reducing. So next slide, please.
Post-meal, Molly, just on that topic, post-meal at 110 is totally doable. You just need to have the biofeedback, figure out which meals and which portions put you over the edge, make some simple adjustments, and it is very easy to eat, nutrient dense, high quality,
and
lots
carbs.
of food. Yes,
and carbs.
stay
You
under
can't eat
110.
carbs.
And I'll show that in the demo here in a second with my own data, because that's what I aim for as well.
Same.
But totally doable.
All right, cool. So there's basically 6 ways that I read the glucose curve. Fasting glucose is 1, peak post-meal glucose is 2. Glucose after a stimulus is basically like a glucose test at home is 3. Glycemic variability is the noisiness of the curve, that's 4. Meal timing is essentially like how many eating episodes a person has. And then, meal timing is when a person eats during the day. When is their sort of eating window? And then meal episodes is how many times they're eating per day. Now, there's also things like I mentioned, standard deviation, which is a marker of glycemic variability. But for now, we'll start with what's most practical. Next slide. So fasting glucose, this is an example of a patient who went from basically borderline pre-diabetic to really changing their lifestyle and dropping their fasting glucose back down to like less than 85 milligrams per deciliter range. Yeah, so it can be done. Next slide. The thing is that you have to understand how fasting glucose changes. So the biggest things that cause elevated fasting glucose, in my experience, are diets high in fructose, that increases liver insulin resistance, diets high in processed packaged foods and fast foods, which damage the microbiome, which contributes to glycemic, basically contributes to liver fat.
Just bad across the board, packaged foods.
Yeah, you just don't want, they just seem to put fat around the abdomen, and they're stressful on the body. They cause inflammation, which is stressful on the body. And then there's also alcohol. So alcohol is going to reliably put liver fat it's going to cause the liver to be fatty. So anytime a person has a fatty liver or a high waist circumference, they're likely to have high fasting glucose. And these are the best ways to lower it, as well as fasting. Fasting is probably one of the best ways to lower fasting glucose. It's very simple first principles. If you empty the sink of glycogen that's stored in your liver, then your body has to start eating through the fat stores in order to survive. So I recommend slowly but surely increasing metabolic flexibility through cyclical ketosis, and then introducing fasting when a person is a little bit more metabolically flexible. Reason why is because a person who is metabolically inflexible who tries to fast will often bonk, which means that they will drop their blood sugar and their ketones at the same time. Yep. And then they will have this stress response. So you want to actually build metabolic flexibility into a body through exercise and through sort of cyclical ketosis, lower carb eating, and then introduce the extended fasting so that they don't end up lightheaded and hurting themselves.
Ease them in.
Next slide.
And Molly, are you layering in ketone testing along with the CGM?
I do like to do that for clients who I wonder if they're really metabolically inflexible. I do like to add the ketone testing, as well as the Lumen there's a company called Lumen, or Metaflow and they have a device that can measure respiratory quotient, and it can just tell you what you're burning, fat or carbs.
Perfect. Yeah, breath device and a CGM are wonderful together.
So basically, this is just explaining how most people are just eating all the time, and so they never drain the sink. And so the more that you extend your window, the more you're going to burn up your glycogen, and the more you're going to tap into your ketones, and the more you're going to build your metabolic flexibility and you're going to improve your liver health. The most interesting thing you'll see with people who fast more often and people who are metabolically flexible is that their liver enzymes are extremely low. They have extremely healthy low liver enzymes, below 15 to 17 for AST ALT, which is a really healthy marker of liver health. Next slide. So peak post-meal glucose. This is basically showing that a person's regularly eating and getting beyond 150 post-meal. You can see by the layer curves. Next slide. So a lot of people go sugar-free. They're trying to lower their sugar intake, and they're going gluten-free. They're trying to lower their wheat intake. And they don't realize that carbs are in everything, and things that we consider to be sugar-free can still have a glycemic response, like maltitol, for example. So you got to look at, you actually have to really learn about nutrition to figure out the things that are going to spike you, because a lot of stuff lies to you on the marketing. Next slide.
Yeah, I just caught a tweet on that where someone publicly shamed a healthy sweets company.
These companies
and then
full of
everyone
shit.
piled in. They're like, "Yep, it's total bullshit, but totally massive
There's
spike."
a lot of these like corn fiber based gummy companies, and I'm just not convinced that they're not going to spike my blood sugar.
Totally.
You know? Next
well,
slide.
that's the thing, that it empowers people, because they think they're making a healthy choice buying a sugar-free sweet, for example. It sounds great. And then you test it and boom, and you would have otherwise never known.
Another thing that people talk about is that a lot of these sugar-free items actually they're processed foods. So they're actually contributing to the microbiome being dysfunctional. And that actually can contribute also to high postprandial blood sugar. So just because you're eating sugar-free things doesn't mean that they're not actually having an insulin response. There's actually a great book called Wired for Health. Sorry about that. There's a book called by Ben Bickman, and it's not Wider for Health. It's Why We Get Sick. And it's a really good book because it's basically all about why there's a lot of sugar-free foods that actually spike insulin. And so, you got to really do your homework on these sugar-free sweeteners because some of them actually do cause insulin spikes. The ones that don't are erythritol and stevia, as far as I know. Next slide. So glycemic load, this is like the thing that you should really learn about, which is basically like oat milk is garbage food. I wouldn't put that near my body. It's got canola oil in it, which is super inflammatory. And it's also just basically straight up hydrolyzed starch into very small starch molecules, which means it's going to spike your blood sugar. And it says it has low sugar, but it's all starch. So your body just digests it and it vaporizes into sugar right when it gets into your body. Another example would be like, 70 versus like, I guess this would be like more like milk chocolate versus dark chocolate. You got to look at the number of carbohydrates in the package and find out what's the carbohydrate load. So you take the total amount of carbohydrates minus the fiber to figure out how much carbohydrate you're getting. And generally speaking, I try to avoid large carb loads, specifically sugar loads can be the most problematic. Like if something has added sugar, I don't want it more than 5 grams. Otherwise, I know it's going to spike my blood sugar. Next slide.
Levels published a blog post recently that was great. It was the out of all of the meals that have been tagged in their app, which ones were the 10 worst offenders, and oat milk latte was right near the top of the list.
Yeah, I try to get everybody off of it. I think it's not a health food. Another thing is just obviously like refined carbohydrates. So, I love CHA chips. I know the founders, they're great people, but they're just because they're gluten-free doesn't mean they're not refined carbohydrates at the end of the day. And then any form of white bread, any form of white refined carbohydrate, white rice, white bread, white potatoes, pretty much anything that's white and a carbohydrate and refined is likely going to spike your blood sugar. Next slide. And then food processing. So just like going from steel cut to to instant oats. Instant oats are basically designed to have higher surface area. So they have the ability to be digested faster. And so they're just going to have more of a glycemic response. Dried mangoes are dehydrated mangoes. So even just 50 grams of them, it seems like it's not very much food, but if you actually were to look at that as a whole, filled with water, it would be a lot larger of a serving. So dried mangoes is another big source of blood sugar spikes. Next slide. And then there's also cooking food versus raw and cooked and cooled foods. So for example, cooked carrots versus raw carrots have a different glycemic response, and cooked and cooled potatoes contributes to resistant starch formation, which can lower the glycemic response. Next slide.
And these are all simple things for people who are genuinely trying to make the healthy changes, and they just need to know how to course correct some simple things. And that's going to make a big difference in their overall outcome.
And this is a study on how just eating non-starchy vegetables first, like your salad at the beginning of the meal, can lower your glycemic response.
Nice.
And then, this is just an example of showing how eating like a salad before pizza or eating your broccoli, even just eating chicken before broccoli, actually. If you have protein in your meal, eating your protein first is going to lower the glycemic response because it also lowers gastric emptying. Next slide. And then always eating your starchy carbs last. This is one of the things that I've learned to do. We tend to want to go for the things we love the most, but in fact, you really want to have the starchiest things last, because if you can get your protein and your fat in first, it's going to lower your glycemic response. It's going to lower your gastric emptying. It's going to slow down the digestion, which is not a bad thing, specifically because carbs are digested very quickly, and they first get broken down by the mouth with amylase. So because of that, we want to eat them last so that we can lower the curve as much as possible.
And these are all things that individuals, you're obviously sharing here things that people are sharing online as they're learning. And quite honestly, the only way for people to really learn this stuff, and for thousands, tens of thousands of people to start testing and really sharing amongst each other what's working. That's also one of the biggest upsides of CGM, is just people who can figure this out, where they would have, I don't know, what would you do before? Check your blood sugar 2 hours after? It's kind of a needle in a haystack. So it just
absolutely
provides incredible ability to really dial things in for an individual, and then also to share with other people. Go ahead.
Yeah. This is just an example of why I wouldn't sit and eat a bowl of rice ever, and why I also don't eat pears and apples on their own. I'm almost always combine them with nut butter or protein. And if I do eat an apple, I usually eat like a half of an apple at a time, because for me, at least my body, a whole apple will spike my blood sugar, especially because a lot of apples are really bred to be super sweet today.
Yep.
So just these little things that you can learn can make a major difference. And then another really cool tip is like, if you just like, a lot of people are eating after they just ate. So the problem with that is that your blood sugar at 100 and you just eat another meal on top of that, you're going to have it spike, even if it was a healthy meal.
Yep.
So that's why I try to get people to learn how to let their blood sugar drop to a healthy fasting range, which will actually lead to like true hunger versus conditioned hunger, because our bodies generally get hungry around the times we typically eat. But if we actually use a blood sugar monitor, we can learn to wait for our blood sugar to be back to our fasting range when it's actually appropriate to be eating next.
Eat at 85.
Eat at 85, but the thing is like, remember, if you are somebody who's experiencing massive chronic stress and you have low cortisol, you really do need to eat more consistently throughout the day, and you don't want to get your blood sugar super, super low. So the caveat to a lot of this stuff is like, you got to know other lab markers preferably. So I always
100%.
check the cortisol curves on clients, because low cortisol is going to contribute to low blood sugar and a difficulty maintaining a healthy fasting glucose. And high cortisol is going to contribute to higher blood sugar, because you're going to have insulin resistance. So keep in mind that you got to look at the hormonal picture too. And like, this is generally for a healthy person, but if somebody is experiencing chronic stress and low blood sugar due to low cortisol, I have them eat more consistently throughout the day, and I don't let them get really low. Next slide. And so exercising before or after meals can actually make a difference depending on the kind of exercise you do. High intensity exercise may spike your blood sugar, but like a short run or weightlifting, typically, depending on how intense it is, moderate intensity exercise, usually doesn't spike my blood sugar. And then exercising after a big meal, like let's say you ate like, one of my favorite things to do is like, I know I'm going to have, let's say I know I'm going to eat a high glycemic food, but it's like my birthday or something. Scheduling in some movement, some like a walk or a run or some fun activity after a really, really high blood sugar inducing meal can make a huge difference. And you can still have your cake, and you just need to move your body. Next slide.
90 minutes of Bikram yoga sends mine, gives me a pretty good spike.
Yeah,
like I can get up to 120 from like 90 just from that workout alone.
And a lot of it could also just be the sensor error from the heat too. You never know. Okay, so this is the stimulus, the 50 grams of effective carbohydrate. This is from the book Wired to Eat by Rob Wolf.
Yep.
And he basically said most people should be just testing out their glucose response to different foods. My only problem with this book and with this strategy is that most people who are eating really low carb are going to be physiologically insulin resistant to carbohydrates, basically because their pancreas is adapted to lower carbohydrate demands and has produced less insulin. So if you eat low carb all the time, you're going to have less insulin output. And so any kind of carbohydrate you consume is likely going to cause a bigger blood sugar spike. So I've adapted my beliefs around metabolism a lot in the last, 10 years because of what I've seen clinically with people who use CGM. They assume that they now need to be low carb all the time, and then they lose metabolic flexibility because they're now always low. And that's problematic because now you can't actually tolerate carbohydrates. So keep this in mind. You want to actually get a person to have, most people need well-rounded meals. Some people are going to do better with higher carb living. Some people are going to do better with lower carb living. But generally speaking, the vast majority of people are going to do better with cycling. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, I've been in that camp where I just kept it too low and stayed keto for too long, and I just became hypersensitive. So what you're saying about cycling, it actually makes a ton of sense. And cycling in ways that are healthy and don't completely send you through the roof. Yeah. There's ways to do it.
Men seem to do better with a lot more intense metabolic stress. Women need to be far more careful because of our hormones and because of kisspeptin dysregulation that can happen from relative energy deficiency. And that is just because our bodies are designed to make children and keep the tribe alive. Men are designed to go out and find food and to keep, predators away. And so we just have this primitive genetics. And so no matter what anyone says about men and women being equal, metabolically, we're not. And I used to do a lot more metabolic stress on my body. I used to actually challenge myself far too much with too much fasting, and that was problematic. Next slide. The glycemic response is basically a reflection of individual variation. It's about an average of 1,000 people. So just keep in mind the glycemic index isn't always accurate for the individual. Next slide. And so glycemic variability is a good example of how stress can change the standard deviation, can change the noisiness of the curve. So if I see a really noisy curve, I always know that the person's really stressed out, and that's what you
Nice.
need to address first.
Makes sense. So
Next-
you're seeing
next
spikes
slide.
when there's
Yeah.
probably not a meal. That's kind
You're
of
just
what you're
seeing
cluing it.
you're seeing really jagged looking curve,
Yeah,
and it's almost
I've
always
seen
stress
that
related.
myself, actually.
And I
Cool.
do need to get my external battery. 1 second. So I'll
Yeah.
let you talk for a second.
Yep. No worries.
Cool.
Doc, what's coming up for you here?
Yeah, I mean, I just a couple points. I think the idea of cycling is important to consider. Obviously, I'm a low carb proponent, but I think for people who are quite insulin resistant, have metabolic syndrome, they have to be a little bit more strict initially to get that basically not only the insulin down, but also the impact on the beta cells of the pancreas, because they are almost stunned with the high glucose.
Right.
So
I
once
actually
they
100% agree with you.
yeah, but then once they're better controlled, they have better insulin control, then I agree you have to cycle. And we had talked offline about how a lot of it is you don't necessarily have to be in a ketogenic state all the time unless you have like a real medical reason for it, but eating just real food, so things that are not processed, goes a long way towards improving metabolic flexibility, but also just everything that Dr. Molly's been talking about.
Yep. So yeah, I completely agree with that. I think a lot of people, I mean, Jason Fung's work was highly influential in my practice. I think people who have really broken metabolisms and really huge problems with insulin resistance and diabetes, prediabetes, do benefit from more intensive metabolic interventions.
Yep.
I do think that, at the end of the day, what I've seen is that when a lot of people have done the work to get their metabolism back into better shape, they tend to learn that they can eat more carbohydrates again, but they're usually it's as a result of shifting towards a whole food diet. So again, we really want to do is get people to eating whole foods and less processed crap. Next slide. So meal timing. A big one for people is eating late at night. Now, we do not want people eating late at night because the body is naturally insulin insensitive at night. It is by design. We are supposed to be moving our bodies and eating fuel during the day, using the fuel. We're supposed to be using our sleep in the dark to repair and to rejuvenate our bodies and to be fasting. It's by design. And so I think we've forgotten this because of modern lives. We don't spend enough time outdoors. We spend all of our time indoors. We live in artificial light. And so people have just got these super messed up circadian rhythms, and they're bored and they're tired and they're stressed. And so they come home from work and all they want to do is sit in front of the TV with more blue light and snack. But that's absolutely the worst thing you can do for blood sugar regulation. And it also impairs sleep. So I tell people, if there's one thing that you can do differently, it's just stop eating after dinner and really try. And the only situation where I would say this rule is broken is when someone has significantly low cortisol and they can't maintain normal blood sugar and they need to have a snack before they go to bed. But generally speaking, it's healthiest for people not to eat late at night.
Yeah, your Oura ring will bark at you as well if you're eating late at night and telling you that your heart rate was elevated through the night when you should have been resting and your HRV is lower. So there's other ways to detect if that's causing a problem using some other technology we'll talk about here later. Yep.
And so basically circadian dysynchrony impairs blood sugar homeostasis. And this can be from things like travel, jet lag, altered food timing, eating late at night, snacking all day long, altered sleep timing. Sleep is a huge cause of insulin resistance. Just people don't sleep well, or people have sleep apnea. And so anytime you get like insufficient sleep, you know you're hungrier the next day. So we just want to keep the circadian cycle aligned with the behavioral cycle. And this alone can improve blood sugar metabolism.
Not just hunger, but just even the ability to self-regulate when you're not sleeping well, and resist temptation becomes harder.
Exactly.
Hunger hormones get jacked up. So dialing in sleep, I would say, is equally important.
Right. So this is just an example of how sleep deprivation can change the metabolism of the exact same food.
Nice.
Next slide. And then, essentially this is eating the same food that's high glycemic, but different times during the day. And it makes a difference in the body response to it. Yeah.
Love it.
Mm-hmm. Next slide.
Who's Glucose Goddess sharing all this
She's
stuff?
she's a friend of mine who I lived with for a period of time, and she's
incredible.
She's done a really great job of creating these images.
Yeah.
And You know, she has as far as I could tell, she used to have a company in the space, but I think she's mostly become like an Instagram influencer for blood sugar. I don't know how far along her product is, but she used to be a product manager at 23andMe.
That's great stuff.
Yeah, great stuff for sure. And then meal frequency. So another big one is just people snacking all day long. Typically when people are snacking, they're snacking on foods that are high in refined carbohydrates, that are high in saturated fats, that are high in excess sugar, that are high in refined vegetable oils. So whether it's the actual timing or the actual foods themselves, it's hard to say, but we do know that every time you eat, you spike insulin. So if you're having more insulin spikes from just eating episodes. So the point I'm trying to make is that we want to get people onto a normal eating schedule. Typically 2 to 3 meals a day is all you really need. Sometimes more, again, for people who are struggling with low cortisol, but for the most part, most people don't need more than 3 meals a day.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Next slide. So this is just an example of how like excess energy and excess meal frequency seems to contribute to the obesity and the disease zone. But we also don't want too little food, right? Anorexia or starvation. We want the sort of just right level. Next slide.
You know, just even beyond like the athletes and bodybuilders who are generally thinking that it's good to eat several times a day.
Yeah.
Have you seen just the effects of training load and the other things that they put their bodies through, that it's hormone damaging? And have you worked with any clients in that space?
I have had multiple bodybuilder clients who've broken their metabolisms through their lifestyle.
I hear that a lot.
I've seen prediabetes is a big one, because they're just eating, like there's this like sort of pervasive idea that you can eat like all this sugar around the time that you're exercising and that insulin will help build muscle. And oftentimes these people look really strong on the outside, but they look terrible on labs. I've also had women who are over exercising, their cortisol is high, they can't lose weight, they can't cut because their body is in a stress response, and getting them to exercise less actually leads to their weight loss.
Last thing they want to hear, exercise less.
I know, but it turns out it works.
First thing they want to hear.
I don't want to hear it.
So anyway.
What are you talking about? You're saying I don't have to work and I'll lose weight? That's awesome.
It's more, well, it's the thing is that 7 days a week, all the evidence for vigorous intensity exercise suggests that 7 days a week is damaging to health. 6 days a week is the max that you should do. 5 days a week is probably more realistic. Moderate intensity exercise you can do every day, but vigorous intensity exercise is the one that you don't want to do every single day, because it's stress on the body.
Totally.
So most people need to exercise more, period. Most people need to exercise way more than they're doing, but like there are outliers.
So Dave, your 1 day a week is perfect.
You know, I'm 3 to 5. I got a pretty good mix, which is a lot of cardio and mixed in weights and like some heavy yoga. And I just use the HRV on the ring. Tell me if I'm overtraining or pushing it too hard.
Yeah.
Thank you, Molly.
Yeah. If
This was
anyone wants to
awesome.
contact me, feel free to find me on Instagram, on LinkedIn or Twitter, or email me.
Love it. Thank you.
Thanks.
That was great.
So
Thanks, guys.
Molly talked a lot about, I'm just going to stop the screen share here and we're going to transition into the demo. But Molly talked a lot about the importance of continuous glucose monitors and the insights that they provide. And equally important to that is being able to see the other complementary data that you would need to look at when you're trying to figure out exactly what is going on with someone, and being able to look at their labs and being able to look at their body composition and being able to look at their cortisol curves and their heart rate variability. And so at Heads Up, what we've tried to do is bring that information together so that the individual patient is able to see this in a way that is accessible to the individual. But equally important is to be able to give the practitioner on the other end the tools to provide the interpretation and to provide the proper diagnosis. Because as Molly has so eloquently stated here, there's lots of different patterns out there that could be causing an individual's glycemic response. It could be stress induced. It could be overtraining. It could be related to cortisol. So what I wanted to do next was just shift over to a quick demo where we can show you how at Heads Up we try to put all of this information together. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And John, maybe we can walk through this together.
Sure. And just one thing before you get into it, one, I think, good takeaway point from Dr. Molly's talk is sometimes it's little changes that make huge differences.
Yep.
So like the idea of, you're more insulin sensitive during the day versus at night. For me, I used to eat my meals. I do like 18-hour windows of fasting. So I used to eat at night and realize that if I eat during the day, that makes a huge difference on my CGM. So it's little things that at some point when people are kind of plateaued in their goals that make a big difference.
Yeah, and working with patients or clients, and Molly gave some amazing tips, like just how to take a meal and make it less of a glycemic load by pairing it up, for example, with a protein, or by putting some coconut oil on it, or things that can be a simple change that still allow that person to engage in something that they enjoy, but make it a little more palatable and a little more friendly on the body. So again, with that said, the focus of this talk has been the importance of continuous glucose monitors and how that can allow us to educate ourselves, educate our patients, especially when we have so many metabolic disorders and so many things that, quite honestly, are hidden in foods that we would have never otherwise expected. I think we covered that in plenty of detail here today. So, and then there's the other technology that you're going to want to integrate. There's a use case to potentially look at someone's sleep patterns, and there are incredible devices on the market that can help with that. And you may, for instance, want to look at an individual's lab work. So I'll just take a few minutes here and walk through the Heads Up system, which is really designed to put all of this information together. And it can be used for chronic conditions, remote patient monitoring. It can also be used in health optimization use cases. This is a typical list of patients here. And John, you can see that I've set this up. This can be set up to monitor any type of physiological parameter. And in this case, I've got nocturnal heart rate variability. And I think that is a big indicator of how well a person's body is recovering. It would also be a good indicator as to whether chronic stress is present. It can also give some indications to looming infection or chronic infection. So this one can come from a device that can reliably measure nocturnal heart rate variability. And I know you and I have used the Oura Ring in the past. There's other good ones out there, but I've set up a dashboard here where I've got a list of patients. I'm looking at nocturnal HRV. I'm able to look at deep sleep. I can look at blood glucose, and this really can come from any device. It can come from a Libre. It can come from a Dexcom. So you can see I can crack this patient open, and I can see that blood glucose is coming from Dexcom. It can pull in data from an Apple Watch. So this is the first part of Heads Up, where you can just decide what physiological parameters do I need to monitor remotely on my clients. So any high-level comments here, John, on pulling together data from different devices to kind of complete the story?
Absolutely. So one of the first things that Dr. Molly said was, in medical school, the way we're trained is, okay, this person has pneumonia, this is how we treat it. This person has diabetes, this is the medication we're going to give them. When you kind of step back and look at why are we so unhealthy as a society, instead of looking at just one thing and saying, okay, that's the trigger, that's the reason, it's important to understand that there's so many variables that go into really making us unhealthy. So we talked about a few of them, but when you have data that you can actually look at, it becomes even more powerful. So like your HRV sleep data that's coming from the Oura Ring. If you say, let's say that person ate late the night before, their deep sleep is going to be down, their HRV is going to be lower because you're suppressing melatonin production in the pancreas. And so you're not getting that deep quality of sleep and your body is more stressed. But being able to not only look at just your CGM data, but then to overlay it with all these other factors, I think becomes much better picture of overall health and what may be triggering either the weight gain or the poor sleep or the high glucose numbers. So I think it's once you take all the data points that you think are important and look at them in totality, I think that's where you get the real kind of medical data that you need in order to make people healthy.
So then this would be something that the patient would see or the client, depending on your type of practice, if it's health optimization or chronic condition. And here's my numbers. And you can see I've got the ability to look at data from an Oura Ring. We have the ability to do timed fasting. And Molly emphasized the importance, especially for people that may already be in the red zone or for people who are trying to pulse metabolic flexibility. Molly talked a lot about that, being able to come in and come out, not stay consistently too long in a ketogenic state, but being able to remain flexible. So I'll occasionally work on, say, a 24 or a 48-hour fast, although somehow Dr. John Lemansky has convinced me to do a 10-day fast starting on August 16th. I don't actually know why I agreed to that, but I did. So I'll be using this to record the 10-day, but you can see this is our patient-facing dashboard where you can actually design all of the metrics that you want them to monitor remotely at home. It can be simple. For low-tech clients, you may want to give them 2 or 3 numbers to focus on. For more sophisticated clients, you may want to start layering in more advanced metrics like ketones and deep sleep and other things like that. So this is the patient dashboard. John, maybe you can just briefly comment on how you use the dashboards for your own remote monitoring.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so my clients, patients are kind of similar to what Molly described, entrepreneurs, high-tech individuals, people who are like type A, really wired. So a lot of them, like, weight gain is not really the issue. It's just they don't feel good. They don't sleep well. So definitely CGM is top for all of them. I use either blood or breath ketone. So usually the Keto Mojo and the Biosense, and then the Aura data. So the sleep data is extremely important for me. I use a BIA to kind of measure body fat percentage. So, that we don't have like API data, but we input it. And then I use the GKI index a lot for depending on what their goals are. A lot of people initially, they're pretty metabolic resistant, even if they're not obese, which I think is kind of shocking for a lot of my patients. They're what we call TOFI, they're thin on the outside, but they're fat on the inside. So for those people, you really have to get them kind of metabolically strict initially, and then you kind of let them start to dabble in things once they start getting the other factors in place. So it's very similar to what you show here, but what I find to be very powerful is when you start to overlay the data on each other. So doing things like the CGM data with HRV data or CGM with ketones, I find that to be really where you start to see people's eyes kind of open up and say, oh, okay, now I understand what you're talking about. It's a complex system that you have to look at different variables.
So here's a reporting tool. Even when I talk to practitioners that are using CGMs every single day, all day long with patients, they still tell me that they're cracking open Excel to try and figure out, for example, the month-on-month change in this patient's blood glucose, or something that's just not reported by the CGM itself. So we've got some pretty advanced reporting tools here. Here's the 30 days of Dexcom data, and you can see this could be Dexcom or Libre. As John mentioned, you can start to overlay other metrics on here, but you can come in here and start to look at specific days. So you can see these candle plots getting thinner and thinner. So this was my max yesterday, 113, my min 83. So you can really quickly at a glance get a look at how someone's doing. We will also do the comparisons for you automatically. So if I want to look at 30 days and compare the results to the prior 30 days, I can quickly see that this individual, in this case, it's me, but assume it's your patient, that they're down 7%. So these can be run over any timeline. I can say, show me their last 3 months compared to the prior 3 months, or current year compared to prior year. And then also, for example, show me their nocturnal heart rate variability on the same graph. So again, this is just part of what we do at Heads Up to help you pull all the pieces together. There's also the ability to track all of the labs. Molly talked about the importance of looking at fasting insulin, at HbA1c, at lipid panel levels, possibly cortisol curves. So all of that information comes in as well. So that's what we focus on, and that's what we specialize at Heads Up, is taking all of this incredible technology that's out there, but quite honestly, it's fragmented and it's siloed, and trying to pull that into one single analytics platform with a beautiful dashboard for your patient and really powerful tools for you as the practitioner. So if that's something you're interested in, then please get in touch with us. Nikki can put the link into the chat if you want to jump on a call and talk more about anything else that we've scheduled, or sorry, that we've discussed here. I'm just checking back to the slides. So Nikki, I know we ran a little bit over, but are there questions that we can pick a few from the chat here, just in closing?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. We can do that. And since we can't get to everyone's questions, I did already drop everyone's contact information in the chat, including Dr. Molly's, if you have anything specific to her. We do have a few questions. What are your thoughts on people who eat one large meal a day, assuming they get their caloric needs met in that meal?
I mean, for me personally, one meal a day works great. Not every day. It's hard just based on how much I'm training and where I'm at lifestyle wise. But I feel great when I do that. But I defer to John and Molly for their medical opinion on that.
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, my answer to pretty much every question is it depends. So it depends on what the goals are, kind of what their metabolic situation is. Like Dave, I pretty much do OMAD, so I do one meal a day. I'm able to get a pretty significant amount of caloric intake into that meal because I do mostly heavy protein and fat and some non-glycemic carbs. I think the one meal a day, in my experience, allows you to be more flexible in your macro ratio as well. So given that that period of time where you're not eating, your insulin is so suppressed, you're able to go through a glycogen storage. It allows you to be more flexible. And generally what I'll try to do is pair it with exercise, as Molly showed on her slides. You can even get away with more carbohydrate intake by doing a heavy exercise. I usually do it before because I don't like to exercise when I feel bloated. So
Totally. Awesome. Thank you guys.
Yeah, I would say the only thing I would add to that is that for women, I do know women who've done one meal a day. It tends to do better in women who are sedentary and obese than women who are lean and healthy. So again, the lean and healthy women have to be more careful with one meal a day because it can actually damage their metabolism and their hormones.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. I think we kind of brushed over this a little bit, but do you foresee any changes in how we measure continuous glucose, for example, with a transdermal sensor?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of products that are coming out there, I mean, there's talk of watches that are able to sense glucose. I don't think the technology is there yet. I think the transdermal sensors eventually will be probably what we'll go for. I think long-term wise, this will be something that it will be on the forefront of medicine plus healthcare or just wellness care. I don't know if we're there yet, though.
I've seen one prototype device that bolts onto the Apple Watch that is purportedly doing this. I don't know how near or far that is from being commercially available. Be awesome though. I mean, if people could have that mainstream and just in a wrist-worn device that is not continuously required, it just makes it more accessible to more people who can become more aware and more empowered. So I'm hoping we get there.
Yeah, I think if you see, from the insurance part, I think if they see reduction in cost, then you'll definitely see a big push for CGM to be available. So I think that's the key is to show, okay, you're reducing hospitalizations, you're reducing, medical costs. Insurance companies will get behind it. There is a company that's working on continuous insulin tests. That I think would be probably a game changer as well. So I don't know if that's ready, but I know they're working on it.
The more the better, John. Continuous glucose, continuous insulin, continuous ketones. I'll take it all.
Right.
Continuous everything. Are all the devices that transmit to Heads Up reimbursable by insurance?
That's a good question. There's two categories of devices that connect to Heads Up. There's what I would consider the traditional FDA approved medical devices, which would be the CGMs, the glucometers, the blood pressure cuffs, and depending on the diagnosis of said patient, that device is probably going to be covered. We also spend a lot of our time integrating the sophisticated wearables, and that would include the Apple Watch, the BioStrap, the Oura Ring. And I don't know that there's a reimbursable use case for that. That's something we've actually been looking into considerably, especially for remote patient monitoring use cases, because things like Oura can provide incredibly valuable information pertaining to chronic condition, but I don't know that there's a reimbursement use case. There might be a remote monitoring use case there, but we haven't dialed that in. I defer to John and Molly on that one.
Yeah, I would say not yet.
Not yet. Copy.
Yep.
10-4. Got it. All right, let's do just a couple more from Dr. Gina. Do you all check the cortisol curve using saliva? If so, what's your favorite lab company for this?
Molly? You're muted.
I use the Dutch test by Precision Hormones, and I've tried the saliva. I find the saliva collection testing to be really inconsistent. Like those things you chew on, it's like I don't trust those things. But I do like the dried urine test. I think they calibrate it with the creatinine, so I think it makes a lot of sense.
Dutch. There you go.
Yeah.
Yep.
One more, Nikki.
One more. Okay. We have somebody asking your thoughts on the K-Watch. Anyone knows what that is?
Yeah, it's a glucose monitor that's on a watch. I don't know too much about it to give a educated opinion. Sorry. I
Haven't
know what
tested
it
it
is,
yet.
but I don't know. It
Coming
looks
soon
cool.
on,
Yeah,
on a future episode.
Coming soon.
do the CGM instead.
Yeah.
It's got history behind it. It's calibrated. It works.
And then just last thing, Dr. Molly, people are asking if you care if we share the slides. Is that okay?
Oh yeah, no problem at all. I'm
Absolutely.
actually going to be teaching the same lecture
Oh,
it'll probably adjusted for CGMs and precision medicine in the fall. So definitely recommend checking that out online for CME credit. And I do have to run because I have a meeting with a patient. But thanks everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Molly.
Molly.
Thank you, John.
Bye,
Nikki.
guys.
Thank you, everyone who attended. We're grateful for your time.
we'll send out the replay. Thanks, guys.
Bye.